Hello and welcome back to the Virtual Playhouse, and welcome to a new artist interview. I'm Alex Rowe, director of Metropolitan Playhouse, and tonight I have the special opportunity for a theater better known for presenting the work of playwrights of yore who have long departed this vale of tears, for I have with me, via Zoom, the author of the play that is currently on the boards at Metropolitan, DW Gregory. DW was hailed by the New York Times as a playwright with a talent to enlighten and provoke. She was so hailed for Radium Girls, her most produced work, and the play we are currently presenting through November 21st of this year. Other plays include Memoirs of a Forgotten Man, Molumby's Million, nominated for a Barrymore Award by the Philadelphia Theater Alliance, The Good Daughter, and October 1962. She has also authored a new musical comedy, The Yellowstocking Play, with composer Stephen A. Alper and lyricist Sarah Knapp. She is a two-time finalist for the Heidemann Award at Actors Theater of Louisville. She writes for youth theater, and she makes occasional appearances as a teaching artist. A recent drama, Salvation Road, is now available through Dramatic Publishing and was the winner of the American Alliance for Theater in Education's Playwrights in Our Schools Award and developed through New York University's New Plays for Young Audiences program. Her work has also received the support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the National New Play Network, the Maryland Arts Council, and she is a two-time winner of the Individual Artist Award in Playwriting in Maryland, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and the New Harmony Project, and the HBMG Foundation. A member of the Dramatists Guild, DW is an affiliated writer with the Playwright Center in Minneapolis and an affiliated artist with the National New Play Network. DW and I personally met when she came incognito to a production of Thunder Rock in early 2020. When she said some nice words to me after the show, I asked her how she knew about Metropolitan. She replied, "I wrote the next play you're putting on." I was instantly charmed by the modest woman whose powerful voice I had already so admired. We were about to put on Radium Girls at that time, and then along came the COVID-19 pandemic and suspended that production for almost a year and a half. It is my greatest pleasure to welcome a living playwright to the Metropolitan Playhouse stage, DW Gregory. Hi, DW.
Hello.
It's very exciting for us, as I've said, and as you know, to actually talk with someone, find out what they're thinking, what they might be thinking. But I'd like to ask you a few things. I've introduced you some with our biography about what you've been up to during the pandemic. How has this affected your particular life? Has it affected all of us?
It had kind of knocked the stuffing out of me, really, because I have this particular play that you were doing gets a lot of productions in educational theater. And with the schools, a lot of the schools shuttering, and they shut down their production. So had more than 100 productions scheduled in 2020, and a lot of them went away. So, and theaters in general, as you know, were all shuttered. So I just kind of put the kibosh on a lot of things, and I took a step back and started thinking about other things. And so I took some courses. I was taking courses on writing for musical theater, actually. There's a conservatory in New York. Because of COVID, they were offering some of their courses online, where ordinarily you'd have to go to New York to take them. So I was able to take some courses in book writing and writing lyrics, and which was really fun, and it was cool. And then I had also was doing some courses in short fiction. So that's sort of how I restructured my life during COVID, as I just started taking classes online, and gradually kind of got back to working on some scripts that I had been working on, but it kind of knocked the wind out of my sails for a while. Kind of lost some, I guess, motivation because there was really nowhere to go with the scripts.
Sure.
So, but now I'm back to working on a couple of projects that I had been working on before the shutdown, and got a lot of productions lined up now. So it's kind of coming back to normality, I guess.
That's great to hear. Are there any productions or any particular projects you want to give an inkling of, or is this private territory at this point?
Working on two. This is a fun project. It's a theater in Tennessee that's doing a theatrical component to a horror film convention next spring. So I'm working on two ghost stories for them. The monologues, campfire ghost stories, so which is a new one for me. So that was a fun change of pace.
I like to think that theatrical productions are always kinds of ghost stories, but telling a compelling ghost story on stage is harder than we might imagine. You don't actually see them as often as I think you might.
So it looks like the way Laura has staged Radium Girls, there might be a bit of a ghost story element to her production with those masks. Some of those shots of the masks in the background is a little spooky.
Indeed, and I think that was a big part of the atmosphere she wanted to create, is that of all the lives that were touched and many lost, and that presence of those forgotten figures throughout the play. The audience has seen some images from the play before we started. Of course, we want them to come see the play, so I'm not going to tip too much more of our hand, but let's talk about Radium Girls. So Radium Girls, as I think most people know, and I'll give a very brief thumbnail, is based on the history of illuminated watch and instrument dial painters who were painting with radium-infused paint that would glow, and that's the illumination. But to do so, they would dip the paintbrushes into their mouths to point the brush and put it into the paint, and then apply it to the watches, which over time they realized to their horror and that was poisoning them. And so the aftermath of their discovery, of the company's resistance to acknowledging that, and ultimately industrial and worker actions that resulted, are the sort of dry political subject of the play. But the real conflict in the story, the very personal story, is what the play delves into. Would you tell us something about your own engagement with the history, how you discovered it, and anything about it that spoke to you particularly, and how you conceived of bringing it to life in a play?
Well, it kind of goes back a long way. I first heard about the dial painters when I was a kid. I was in elementary school, and my fifth grade teacher, I remember her telling us a story about women working in these watch factories and working with this radium laced paint and tipping the brush on their tongues. And even at that age, I understood that was a very dangerous thing to do. And so the idea of something like that happening, I couldn't understand how that could happen, how you could be going to work every day and you'd be doing something that dangerous, and how could this be? So it was a story I'd heard a long time ago. What brought me to write a play about it was a number of years later, after I had done an MFA and written a few plays, and I had developed a relationship with a theater in New Jersey called Playwrights Theater of New Jersey. They were they're no longer producing, but at that time, this was in the late 90s, I had a few readings there, and they had worked on the development of another play of mine. So I had come across something on the internet. I was just kind of fooling around on the internet. We had first gotten it at my place of work. And so I was just typing in search terms, just entertaining myself, playing with the search engine, and I typed in radium. and up popped this article about a court case in New Jersey, which I had known nothing about. I didn't know anything about the New Jersey cases. I knew that there were watch factories in Illinois, but I didn't know anything about this New Jersey case. And this article that came up was actually a chapter in a book on mass communications. And the article was about how the New Jersey Consumers League had organized this kind of a public interest campaign around the dial painters, and how they had used the press to lobby for reform, industrial health reform, but also for justice for the women who worked in the factory. So I saw that and I thought, that's a play. There's a play in this. And I typed up a one-page summary of what I thought it was. And I took it to the artistic director at Playwrights Theater and I said, this is the next play I'd like to write. And he was immediately intrigued because it was right in his backyard where this story took place. Playwrights is out in Madison, and it's about 10 miles from Orange, where the events of the play take place. So I immediately had the support of the theater, and I set out to research it. And that was about a year and a half process, because I was working a full-time day job at the time, and I didn't really have any, I didn't have any grant support. I had to sort of finance my own research. So I did a lot of research at the Library of Congress, where the Consumers League papers are in the manuscript division. And I went up to New Jersey and I did research at the Harrison Martland collection. I was part of the, I think it was I can't remember, School of Medicine. I'm blanking now whether it was associated with Rutgers or I think it was. And so there are some other locations also where I got some materials. So a lot of the research, the Consumers League materials included a lot of news clippings. So it was a news coverage from the time. It was really revealing and helpful to have all that, as well as some correspondence, a lot of correspondence, and then there were some records, not a lot of records from the company itself, which I tried to get a hold of at the time, but I wasn't able to run down the corporate records. They were out in, at that time, they were at the Oak Ridge Laboratory in Tennessee. And I wasn't able to get a hold of them. I met with a lot of resistance from the laboratory when I tried to arrange to go out and do some research. So that didn't come together, but I got a lot of other material in other places.
And it would be preposterous to ask you to say, what are the themes of the play? What I would love to know is about anything you remember that particularly grabbed you about that history beyond the pathos that you felt became the play that you wrote. And that question might lead into what sort of discoveries, if any, have you made about how the play resonates in seeing all the productions you've seen? Because the plays have both the inception and then the development. They're two different lives.
Right. Well, it seems to me, the obvious, the first thing, of course, is that these women worked in the factories. They were completely unaware of the danger. And at that time, the play makes it clear too, people thought of radium as this bright substance. It was they were doing early research into cancer treatments using sort of an early version of radiation therapy, kind of a crude version of radiation therapy, and it was effective. They did shrink tumors, and people thought it was a health tonic, and they were putting it in everything. They were putting it in cosmetics and selling it as suppositories, and sort of an early version of Viagra. It was like it'll rev you up. So it was not, and that was before a lot of these. Before there was a lot of regulation of drugs and health supplements and that kind of thing. And so it was just, people just, I mean, they literally ate the stuff thinking it was good for them. And of course, it was soon revealed that it wasn't a good idea. So there was this part of it that I thought that intrigued me, was this whole idea of, and it seems to me like it's something that isn't exclusive to radium. We've seen this story play out in other ways, but there's all this excitement over some scientific discovery, a commercialization of the discovery. People just embrace it, and they think if a little bit is good, a whole lot is better. And they're sort of just going whole hog over something, and then finding out that, well, maybe that's not true. A little bit might be good, and a whole lot might be really, really bad. And so it's something peculiar about our culture, I think, this commercialization of science, the pursuit of health and wealth, which has played out in all sorts of other ways. Going back to the medicine shows of the 19th century, this is something that just seemed to me peculiarly American about this story. Would it have played out the same way in other countries? Maybe it has, but I just thought, oh, there's something very interesting, intriguing here, and what it says about capitalism too. And so, those are the kind of things that grabbed me. But the other thing that grabbed me was that you're dealing with a situation where there are these young girls, 14 and 15 years old, a lot of them, when they went to work at the factory. And they would leave school after 8th grade, which was not uncommon in those days. You'd have a grammar school education, you'd leave, you'd go out and you'd work. And so they were still very young, very compliant young women. Young women were expected to be compliant. And as I was researching the play, it became clear. I mean, the company then, in its defense against the lawsuits, part of their positioning was to try to hold the women responsible for working in a factory. It's like it was the same thing that the cigarette companies did later, claiming that they couldn't be held liable. People have personal responsibility. You smoke cigarettes, you knew it was dangerous. You shouldn't have done that. And that was sort of the same argument the Radium company was making. Well, I've got a picture, a framed picture of an old advertisement from the 30s of a cigarette ad. And the ad says, how does it say? It's basically promoting the idea that cigarette smoking is good for your health because it will help you control your weight, and it's promoting cigarettes to women as a weight control kind of device. You should smoke to keep from putting on weight. And I keep that ad in a frame and on my wall, because it is a concrete reminder of just the nonsense that these companies will go through. Of course, the cigarette companies for years promoted tobacco as being good for your health. And then the fact that they got away for years and years and years with arguing that they did no such thing, and that it's the personal responsibility of smokers, when they were sucked in by cigarette advertising for years and years. So I just thought that the story was something that there was something about it that was kind of unchanging in our culture. And but it was so compelling to me, because now, of course, everybody knows that radium isn't a good thing to be drinking. We all know it. And it's kind of stunning to think that anybody ever thought otherwise, but they did. So that's what part of the things that were intriguing to me. And I was also compelled, I think, by the just sort of the power relationships, the gender politics of the play. And the fact that these young women, finally, they didn't take it lying down. They did fight for their day in court. They did fight for justice. They were not just sort of meek, uncomplaining martyrs, as they were portrayed in the press at the time. But they, in fact, weren't. And they did what they could to get justice for themselves. So I thought that too was a compelling story.
As you talk about it, I'm wishing that all the audience who watches this would be able to see the show or had seen it to appreciate how you've brought all these concerns so beautifully to life, both from the array of other characters, the snake oil salespeople, the miracle cure people, all the populace. It's a social phenomenon you're describing on the one hand, the enthusiasm for science and the fads, and you managed to bring them all on stage without losing track of what I call the central
stories.
tension.
Yeah, the heart of the story, as you said, is the personal stories. It's really the two couples. It's Grace, who is the lead dial painter, and her boyfriend, her fiance, and Mr. Reader, the company president, and his wife, and they kind of got moving in parallel. And which I really think, that's the heart of the play. But the rest of it, which is all this sort of circus twirling around them, all of the craziness that's happening around them, is important, I think, to understand the world that they're moving through. So.
Oh, exactly. So, and it's the interplay between the most personal stories and that swirl around them that gives the play, I think, a singular power. Really, really elevates it into a magical experience. The other thing that you point out too, I want the audience to know this, is that the phenomenon of the victims, being blamed for their own fate in a way, and that connects to so many stories we've heard, even when it's a question of sexual promiscuity, which interweaves in as the suspicion of why they get ill. All these too familiar and really important currents in our culture are focused in a lens through this fascinating story.
Right.
There's another that you just mentioned, and that's the celebration of the press. You mentioned that the press makes them out to be these sort of innocent martyrs, which indeed they are, but they were also fighting very, very hard.
Right.
Do you see anything in the development of American journalism in this period? It's obviously an inheritor of yellow journalistic experiments, and practices from the early century, taking a story, getting to the truth of it, lobbying on their behalf, even by sensationalizing them and in some ways misrepresenting them. I don't know if there's more to say about that.
Well, it was definitely, the 20s were definitely the heyday of tabloid journalism. The early precursors of the Enquirer and the Star and those kind of crazy tabloids that, if you ever had dug back into some of those papers at the time, they were really into sensational, emotional stories. So this was tailor-made for the tabloids of the 20s. And I think it was true then, it's true today, that a lot of press for your cause is not going to hurt your cause. I mean, the more press they could get, the more press the women could get, the more the more pressure people would bring to bear on the company. And we see this now in lightning fashion on social media. How many times there's been pythons on Twitter or whatever, and you're going after a company, and suddenly they're being bombarded, and they like, all right, so we'll deal with this errant employee, make sure, so this happens now today, and much the same way. It's just slightly different players that are bringing this, but still today, the pack journalism is not a thing of the past, and you can have multiple news outlets. Not as many newspapers as there used to be, but still news outlets and online outlets and broadcasts and what have you, and cable, and chasing this same story and just hammering me with it, especially cable. very good at hammering you with stories. So I don't see a lot that has changed in the way that journalism functions in this country. In fact, I sort of see a regression. There was a time, I think, from maybe the late 50s into the 90s, where there was a genuine effort on the part of what I would call the respectable, legitimate press. I'm not talking about the crazy people putting out newsletters in their basements, citizen journalism, but actual, like the Times, the Post, the LA Times, the big city papers. There was an understanding that the press had responsibility, that and that the idea of objectivity in journalism, something that was fairly late in developing. It really wasn't until the late 50s that there was I think, an effort on the part of a lot of press outlets to adopt some serious ethical standards in journalism. And I see a real regression. That there's an awful lot of news coverage today that's agenda driven. And I don't think it's true, as overtly true of some of the major outlets. They're still aspire to it's kind of objective journalism, although I don't think you can ever be truly objective. But in a way, it's kind of turned it on its ear, because in the last few years, we've seen that the effort to be towards fairness can be exploited mightily. And so you've got outlets that they're not really getting at the crux of the problem, because they're trying to write these both sides kinds of articles that aren't really dealing with the facts. You don't have two sides of an issue dealing in good faith. At least that's the way I see it. So it seems like there's a crisis in our democracy, and there's a crisis in journalism today, because there are a number of outlets now that I feel are abusing the First Amendment. I mean, they're hiding behind the First Amendment in order to push political agenda. So that's not really new, but there was a time in our history, I think, when people understood that was part of the newspapers originally were put out by political parties, so people understood where they were coming from. But I think today we're kind of conditioned to think that the press is more objective, and when it isn't, I think you're more likely to be kind of suckered in and not realize that you're not getting the full story.
Some commentators will then go on to say, well, obviously the press can't be objective, and so celebrate or foreground that virtue. And what it makes me think, in connection with the play Radium Girls, is it's one more genie that is out of the bottle. And the question, as we develop these new technologies, as we embrace fads, as we see new power come into all of our hands, the question is not, can we stop it, but how do we cope with these forces that get out of control?
Right.
And I think that the play asks that in such a marvelous way. And in this story from almost 100 years ago is once again resonates in so many different ways. Let me ask you then just one more thing about your experience with the play over the years. Has it, in your own eyes, your feel for it changed? You mentioned that it's performed a number of times in educational settings, and I think it's a wonderful play because of its focus on young women, as well as its important sociological themes to present in high schools and colleges. Has that experience been a particularly illuminating or exciting odyssey for you, as you've grown to know your child as it's grown to 20 years in its iterations?
Well, of course, when you write a play, you're envisioning your name in lights, the new victory or something, So you're not thinking about wherever it may end up. You're not expecting high schools to do it. At least I wasn't. I'd never imagined when I was writing the play, and I'd never thought of it as something that would be done at schools. I thought it was kind of a hard play to do or to do well. Now that I've seen it a number of times, I'm thinking, it's not that hard. I mean, if you can do a musical, you can do this play. If you can do Shakespeare, you can do this play. So it's not really an incredibly difficult play to do, but for high school actors to do the doubling that it calls for, I think is a heavy lift. Because really, I mean, you've got, I don't know, I don't know how many actors you have, 9 or 10, but you've got 10 actors, and they're doubling into 38 roles. And you need, with the exception of the 2 leads, everybody else is doubling. 2 leads don't double. So you've got you need 7 or 8 actors who can move in and out of distinctly different characters and do it on a dime. And so you need people who can do, and they do it with mostly vocally and with their physicality. I mean, your production is using some masks, but most productions, that's the first time I've ever seen anybody use masks with the production. Other productions, people are just affecting a new character with the costume and their voice or however they do it. And so that's not something that high school students can do really, or most of them can't really pull that off. They just don't have the experience. But as it turns out, the high schools don't do that kind of doubling. One of the reasons why they like play is that there are so many characters in it. I saw one production where they single cast every single character. So 1 kid per speaking role. So they had 38 kids in this play. This one little boy, he was so cute. He plays the part. His character is called the Lovesick Cowboy. He's got a speech in the second act. And he's waiting backstage the whole time. With some of the other ones too. They were playing these other the characters who appear just briefly as letters, really. They're letters to the girls, but he shows up. He's like maybe 13 years old, with a big cowboy hat on. He's so intense about his speech. And I just thought, oh, God love him. So, the high schools are interested in it, I think, because it's got a lot of good parts for girls. And even now, sadly, it's hard to find a lot of material that have good parts for girls. It's really still kind of limited. And in the schools, the girls turn out for drama 2 or 3 times the number of young women are turning out as guys. So the schools are always looking for plays that have a lot of parts for girls. So there's a lot of reasons why the schools like it.
But I'd say, as far as the play being performed in high schools, I think you're in very good company with J.D. Salinger and Mark Twain, and growing up with Emily Dickinson. Lots of writers who are perhaps better and best known for their
high school
curricula rather than
curriculum or drama. Yeah.
Well,
so
we're certainly
play. I guess I'll brag about the play now. It's made the list of the 10 most produced plays in U.S. high schools now for 4 years in a row.
That's right.
And so it's in pretty good company with Arthur Miller and William Shakespeare on that list.
No complaints.
Yeah.
It's been a particular joy to present it, and particularly meaningful now as we come out of the pandemic. Most of our audience will know this is the play we were about to present when we shut down in March of 2020. So it's the first play we're presenting as we rejoin the audience in person on stage. And I feel that it, and maybe theater itself, has a particular import to us as we can gather again safely as we can, of course. I've been very, very touched by that. As you've seen your work starts to be rekindled elsewhere, and perhaps you're getting out to performances yourself, any reflection from you about how maybe your feeling about theater in the world, your work in the world, has changed or hasn't changed, has been reinvigorated, has been reemphasized in light of the current moment?
I'm going to get in trouble for saying this. With somebody, I'm going to get in trouble with somebody.
Excellent.
It reinforced for me how much theater is really a living event. I know your theater included, you've done a lot online and done events online, done readings online, and I think every theater has done what they could to continue to do programming through the pandemic and do it remotely, and some have been more successful than others. I'd seen a few things that I just could not connect to at all, and I had a strong feeling that that if I had been in the room, I would have had a radically different experience of what I was watching. But I also saw a few things where I was really kind of surprised at how well it all played, and how well the theater was able to make it work. I don't know if you've seen anything the Irish Rep had done early on, but they did a production of it was A Touch of the Poet by O'Neill, and I swear I don't know how they did it, but the lighting, they did something with the lighting that amazed me, where you'd see the characters, and the backdrop was a still photo of, I guess, of a shot of the set that they had used in their original production. And they had the actors were all in different cities. So, I mean, you know the drill. I think you've done this yourself, but they managed this particular production. This one actress, she kneels down by the fire, and then there's light on the side of her face. And I thought, whoever is pulling this together, technically, they're doing amazing things. But it still was not, for me, the same. I felt that, which maybe is why I really kind of lost some steam for writing plays during the pandemic, because I felt really strongly that there is something in that live experience and the energy of the audience feeding the actors, and the audience, reacting to, sort of feeding off the energy of the actors, and the actors feeding off the audience, that is just, you can't duplicate on a screen. So that's my takeaway from the pandemic, is that it's a community experience. And we need to get together as a community and share these stories. And digital theater can certainly expand the audience and make things available to people who aren't able to get to those particular theaters. But, there's something really interesting has happened in theater in the last 20 or 30 years. Is a number of communities, small communities, where there are now professional companies that didn't exist 25 years ago. And I don't know, we're living in a very interesting time where theater is struggling and yet expanding and contracting and struggling to figure itself out. And we're having all sorts of debates now about how to proceed, how to pay people, just whether we should have 10 out of 12 anymore. So a lot of the old paradigms are being challenged, but ultimately, it's like what is the commercial? It's not the next best thing to being there. It's like to have theater, you got to be there.
We've certainly found that being there is many, many times as enriching now that we've spent such a long time not being able to be there as well. So an exclamation point at everything you say. But indeed, your own light was fantastically failing as the computer screen died a little. If you have a light that you can turn on, I'd love to encourage you to take a final bow for us. But it was a magical effect. I hope our audience will agree. They may or may not.
Well, I apologize for that. I didn't turn on the light because I was too busy here talking to you, thinking about all these questions when I should have turned on the light.
I'm not a lighting designer. I thought it was fantastic because we really got to focus on the thrust of the argument and your voice in the darkness. It was like being around the fire. And if no one agrees, well,
that was the first theatrical experience. The stories told around the fire.
Exactly right. It's on them if they have a problem with it. But what I really hope is that they will get another chance to see you, perhaps even this coming Monday on November 15th. You will be joining the Right Away crew and our director, Laura Livingston, in an improvised playwriting evening, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I am. I'm on the bill. Oh, my goodness. We had a rehearsal last night. It was really fun. I mean, I enjoyed it. I don't know if the audience will enjoy it as much as the writers.
Oh, they'll enjoy it. So briefly, the Synergy Theater and Freestyle Repertory in New York, Synergy is in California, Walnut Creek, gather writers together. Seldom are they, in fact, published and professional writers like DW Gregory, but gather improvising writers together to write a play in 45 minutes. I'll say no more, but you can check our website or the Freestyle Rep website if it's before November 15th and get the link for that. It's well worth your time. Or local audiences will be lucky enough to see DW Gregory in person here at Metropolitan Playhouse on November 21st, following our final performance of Radium Girls, following the matinee. That's a 3 p.m. performance. Go to our website, purchase your tickets for that date, or if it's sold out, as it may well be very soon, any of the other remaining performances before November 21st, 2021. Our website, of course, is www.metropolitanplayhouse.org. And if you cannot make it, here is your chance to once again nod and applaud and thank for her patience with my questions and interesting and wide-ranging reflection on the play, her career, and all it touches on. DW Gregory, thank you very, very much for spending this time with me.
No problem. I look forward to seeing the show.
Great pleasure. And we'll see you then. Audience, stay tuned for all that information on your screen.